Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
When your own mother tells you you're the practice child, you don't cry, you don't flinch, and you definitely don't give her the satisfaction of seeing you break. Because somewhere deep in your gut, buried beneath the layers of forced smiles and measured silences, you always knew you were never really one of them. Not in the way your sister was. And so, last Friday, sitting across from her at that cluttered oak dinner table where so many years of uncomfortable family dinners took place, while my dad slurped his soup like it was a competition, and my sister Katie gushed about her new lake house like she hadn't borrowed money from half the table just 3 months ago, my mom set her wine glass down, tilted her head toward me, with that smug grin she wears when she's about to be playfully cruel, and said, "Well, we all know Rachel was the practice child," then laughed like she'd just delivered the line of the night. I didn't respond. I didn't even blink. I calmly picked up the empty plates from the table, one by one, even offered to wrap up the leftover roast chicken Katie hadn't touched, and carried everything into the kitchen like a good daughter. That's what I've been trained to do for 40 years. Keep the peace, be the neutral one, the buffer, the shadow in the background that made things easier for everyone else. And they let me. They let me fade so well I nearly believed I liked being invisible. But something changed in me as I stood over that sink, rinsing dishes while I listened to them all laughing in the next room. Laughing like what she'd said hadn't landed like a goddamn sledgehammer against my ribs. They laughed because it was true for them. For them, I was just that. The draft version, the warm-up round before they got it right with Katie. They laughed because it was easier than looking at me and realizing what that label actually meant for me. Not a joke, not a funny quip, a fucking life sentence. I dried my hands slowly, methodically. I listened to my dad pour another whiskey. I heard Katie go off about her new backsplash and how her contractor was so expensive but so worth it. And my mom chiming in, "That's my girl, she always had taste." While I stood in the kitchen doorway just long enough for my mom to notice me, our eyes met. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something shift in her face. Not regret, not guilt, maybe confusion, like she was surprised I was still standing there. I said nothing, just grabbed my coat, slipped on my boots, and walked out the front door without a word. I didn't drive home right away. I parked 3 blocks away at a closed-down diner with a broken neon sign and just sat there with my head against the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I was too dry inside for that. What I felt wasn't sadness. It was a quiet clarity, like when you finally hear a high-pitched noise you didn't realize had been ringing in your ears for decades. And once it's gone, the silence is almost unbearable. That's what her words gave me. Not pain, permission. Permission to stop pretending this was something it wasn't. A family, a bond, a safe place. It had never been any of that. And I was finally ready to stop auditioning for a part I was never going to get. The next morning, I deleted the family group chat. I didn't block anyone. That would have made a statement. No, I wanted something quieter. Something they'd feel, but not understand. That's the thing about emotional distance. It burns slower, but deeper. And when Katie called 2 days later, her voice crackling through the phone, breathless and frantic, saying, "What the hell did you do? Mom's been crying since yesterday. She won't eat. She won't talk to anyone." I let her talk. I let her panic. And when she finally stopped to breathe and ask again, "Rachel, seriously, what did you say to her?" I answered with the calmest voice I've ever used. "I didn't say anything, Katie. That's the problem, isn't it?" She went silent for a second, then started accusing me of being cruel, of blowing things out of proportion, of taking everything the wrong way like I always do. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just let her spiral. That's when I realized the real revenge wasn't in yelling or confronting or even explaining. The real revenge was letting them sit in the silence they created and called love. And here's what I want to ask you. Because maybe you've been there too. Maybe your mom said something one day that cracked your whole world open. Not with violence, not with rage, but with a smile and a joke and a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. If your mother called you the practice child, would you react? Would you shout? Would you cry? Or would you do what I did? Bituota. Pick up the dishes and let the silence speak louder than your voice ever could. Because sometimes, when people hurt you, they expect you to scream. What they're never prepared for is what happens when you don't. There's something deeply unsettling about the way silence stretches between people who are used to noise. Not the kind of noise made by shouting or chaos, but the everyday clatter of habitual, emotionally bankrupt conversations, the hollowed-out sound of asking about each other's days, not out of care, but out of muscle memory. And in that vacuum I left behind after walking out of that dinner without a word, I knew I had planted something far more devastating than confrontation. Because while a fight comes and goes, silence lingers like fog in an old house. It creeps into the corners and makes everything else feel colder. I didn't answer my mother's texts the next day. Not the little passive-aggressive ones she always sent after family gatherings like, "I hope you're not still upset, I was only joking," or the follow-up a few hours later. When I didn't reply, that simply read, "Wow, okay then," which was her version of doubling down without ever actually acknowledging she'd done anything wrong. I didn't even open them. I didn't block her because I didn't want her to get the satisfaction of thinking she'd pushed me far enough for that. I wanted her to watch the read receipts pile up like unanswered prayers. On the second day, she called twice. On the third, she called 6 times and left a voicemail, where she tried to sound concerned, saying she was just checking in and that "we're all worried about you." But I could hear the clipped edge in her voice, the subtle panic creeping in through the cracks of her carefully curated tone. The realization that maybe this wasn't going to be one of those times when Rachel just swallowed the insult and came back like a good soldier. Maybe, just maybe, I was done. By the end of the week, the silence had become its own living, breathing thing, a shadow that sat between us, invisible but unmistakable. That's when Katie called me. It was a Saturday morning, late enough that I'd already finished my second coffee and was halfway through organizing old boxes in my attic. The kind of mindless chore that gives your hands something to do when your brain won't stop replaying old conversations, old hurts, old birthdays you were left out of. My phone rang, and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. And when I picked up, her voice came through like a warning siren. "What did you do?" she asked, skipping any greeting, her voice pitched high and tight, like she'd been crying or maybe just yelling at someone else moments before. "Rachel, what the hell did you do? Mom's been crying since yesterday. She won't eat, she's barely sleeping, she's convinced something's horribly wrong, and she won't tell me what you said to her. What did you do?" I sat down on the floor, cross-legged beside a half-open box labeled Christmas 1997, and I let her spiral. Let her unload all the emotional chaos I knew my mother was incapable of handling herself. Katie, ever the golden child, the buffer, the one who got the full-color version of our mother while I got the rough draft, had never seen our mother like this before. Not broken, not small, not uncertain. It scared her. "I didn't do anything," I said finally, slowly, clearly, as if I were speaking to someone in shock. That's what's scaring her. I stopped performing. I stopped playing the part. Katie was silent for a beat, then laughed, a brittle, joyless sound. "You've always been dramatic," she said, which was ironic, considering the woman on the other end of the call was in full panic mode over a daughter who hadn't even raised her voice. I didn't argue. I let her sit in it, let her try to make sense of something that didn't make sense within the narrow script our family had always followed. Rachel gets hurt. Rachel shuts down. Rachel apologizes. Repeat. Only this time, I hadn't followed the script. I had closed the book and walked away. That was the part they didn't know how to handle. And while Katie tried to wrap her head around it, I opened a box I hadn't looked at in years. One I'd labeled in a moment of bitter clarity as, "For Katie, one day." Inside were photos, old report cards, letters, proof, really. Not just of memories, but of patterns. Birthday cards where mine read, "Love Mom," and hers read, "To my beautiful shining star." School awards I'd won that were shoved in envelopes, and hers that had been framed. Letters from our mom to her while she was in college, full of encouragement, pride, affection, and one letter addressed to me that was still sealed, never opened, because when I'd held it up to the light years ago, I'd seen it was blank. I didn't know then what I would do with that box, but I knew it mattered that it existed, that there was evidence, a kind of ledger of emotional neglect that I had carried alone for decades. And for the first time, holding those papers, that old Polaroid of my 8th birthday party, where everyone's smiling but me, I felt powerful. Not because I planned to weaponize them, but because I finally understood that what happened to me had actually happened. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been too sensitive. I had been sidelined, belittled, emotionally underfed, and expected to say thank you for the crumbs. The silence I was giving them now wasn't about punishment. It was about proof. Proof that I was no longer available for the role of scapegoat, the emotional sponge, the daughter-shaped doormat. And as Katie hung up on me after yet another frustrated plea to, "Just talk to Mom, fix this, she's not well," I stared at that box and knew exactly what my next move would be. Not loud, not cruel, just honest. Because sometimes, the best way to make someone panic isn't by screaming, but by finally saying nothing at all. The attic smelled the way old secrets do, like cardboard, dust, and the stale breath of things left untouched for far too long. And as I sat cross-legged on the floor with that box marked, "For Katie, one day," cracked open beside me, I realized that I wasn't just holding a collection of old papers and photos, but something far heavier, far more intimate, and far more damning. A curated archive of my own invisibility, documented not through absence, but through a sickening imbalance of attention, affection, and the cold arithmetic of favoritism that had colored every year of my life without me even fully realizing it. It hadn't started as a revenge plan, not really, because I'm not the kind of woman who dreams up ways to hurt people even when they deserve it. No, it had begun more like a quiet coping mechanism, something to help me stay sane on holidays and birthdays when my sister was paraded like a prize, and I was treated like the technicality they forgot to reschedule. But over the years, as the collection grew, as the discrepancies became impossible to ignore, the idea began to evolve into something with edges, something with purpose. And by the time I turned 35 and had finally accepted that the apology I'd been waiting for would never come, the box had become less about healing and more about holding the truth hostage until I figured out what to do with it. There were dozens of pieces. Photos, yes, but also things most people wouldn't think to keep. Like the list my mom made for Katie's high school graduation party that included an ice sculpture and a professional photographer, while mine, written 3 years earlier on the back of a CVS receipt, had "buy soda and find balloons if time," or the time-stamped emails from when I got accepted into my college of choice, to which my mother replied 2 days later with a generic, "That's great, honey," while Katie's acceptance was followed by an all-caps post on Facebook. 3 dozen phone calls and a catered dinner party at our house with candles and custom cupcakes shaped like diplomas. I didn't start scanning and emailing the contents of that box to Katie all at once, because overwhelming someone with truth too quickly doesn't work. It only makes them defensive, makes them clutch tighter to the narrative they've built their identity around. And so instead, I picked the first few pieces with surgical precision. A photo of me on my 7th birthday with no candles, no guests, just me holding a store-bought cupcake at the kitchen table. A scanned image of one of her many glittery birthday invitations with "We are so proud of you" written in our mom's handwriting. And then, the coup de grace, an old voicemail from my mom I'd saved accidentally on a backup drive, where she confused the dates of my graduation and said, "You know I can't be everywhere at once, Rachel. Your sister needs me that day." I sent the first email on a Tuesday, around lunchtime, when I knew Katie would be taking a break from whatever work-from-home conference call she was sitting through in her designer leggings and motivational mug. I gave it a simple subject line. Just wondering. No explanation, no context. Just a photo and a scanned card. Within 10 minutes, she responded with a laughing emoji and, "Okay, not sure what this is about?" I sent another the next day. This time, no message, just a birthday photo of her surrounded by balloons and kids, and me in the background, helping clean up, not even in the frame properly. 2 hours later, "Rachel, are you okay?" By Friday, her tone had shifted. "Where did you get all this?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" And then, a few minutes later, "Did something happen? Is this about Mom?" It was working, not because she was angry or confused, but because she was starting to see, and that was the first crack in the foundation of her belief system. The beginning of the end of the version of our family she'd been sold, and I'd quietly endured. But I didn't reply. Not yet. Letting her sit with the evidence was more powerful than any explanation I could have offered. It had to come from her. She had to arrive at the truth on her own terms, or it wouldn't stick. 3 days later, just after midnight, I got the message I'd been waiting for. No emojis, no sarcasm, just 6 words that hit me like a confession in a darkened church. "I think you're right about Mom." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I needed validation. I'd stopped needing that years ago, but because, in that moment, I realized something deeper than I'd admitted to myself. I hadn't just wanted Katie to see what her mother had done to me. I needed someone to witness it, to stand next to me and say, "Yes, that happened. You're not crazy, you're not exaggerating. You were always second place, and it wasn't your fault." I didn't respond that night. I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in the quiet living room, letting the silence wrap around me like a weighted blanket. It wasn't peace, not quite, but it was something close. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come out in screaming matches or teary interventions. It comes in paper and ink, in forgotten voicemails, in pictures that never should have been taken, and in the realization that for every memory someone treasures, there's another memory someone else is trying to forget. There comes a moment in every long, slow unraveling of a family lie when silence shifts from being a weapon to becoming a language of its own. And by the time I parked in front of my mother's house 3 months after that dinner, the one where she so effortlessly dismissed 4 decades of my life with a single sentence, I wasn't there to argue or scream or beg for accountability, because I had finally accepted that the apology I had once cried for in the dark, the one I imagined she might offer with tears in her eyes and trembling hands, was never going to come. And more importantly, I no longer needed it to come in order to feel whole. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Not Katie, not my father, and certainly not my mother. The house was exactly the same as it had always been. Modest, overly clean, too many decorative pillows on the living room couch, a faint smell of lemon cleaner mixed with something stale and overcooked. And as I walked up the pathway lined with those ceramic garden frogs she refused to throw away, I realized that nothing about the outside of this life had changed. Not a single inch, even though everything inside of me had. She opened the door before I even knocked, which told me she'd been watching, waiting maybe, hoping I'd show up eventually to fix whatever it was she thought I'd broken by refusing to play the game. Her face was pale and tired, older somehow than just 3 months should have allowed, and for a split second, I almost hesitated, almost softened, almost stepped forward to hug her out of reflex. But then I remembered the voicemail she left 2 weeks earlier, the one where she said in that clipped voice of hers, "I don't know what kind of point you're trying to make, Rachel, but you've made it, and it's cruel." As though choosing myself for once in my life was some kind of act of emotional violence, and any tenderness I had evaporated. "I'm not staying," I said, stepping just far enough inside to let the door close behind me. And before she could even begin one of her long, guilt-laced openings, "You look thin," or "I've been so worried," I reached into my bag and pulled out a small cardboard box, plain, worn around the edges, and handed it to her without ceremony. She didn't take it right away. She just looked at me, confused, then back at the box, and when she finally reached for it, I felt that familiar flash of detachment, the one I'd learned to rely on as a child, when her love felt like a test I never studied for. "These are yours," I said simply. "Family heirlooms, letters, photos, whatever. I don't want them anymore. You should keep them, or give them to Katie. She opened the box while standing in the hallway, right where I'd stood countless times as a teenager, trying to ask her why she didn't come to my soccer games or why she missed my piano recital for Katie's dentist appointment. Inside the box were a few things I knew she cared about: a ring that had belonged to her mother, some old photo albums where Katie's face beamed from every page, and even a baby blanket with my name stitched into it, though I'm not sure she ever remembered wrapping me in it. She didn't speak right away. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again, like she was debating whether to ask why or to pretend it was nothing. Eventually, she said, "Why are you doing this?" But there was no anger in her voice, no real curiosity either, just confusion, like a person who's misplaced something they didn't realize mattered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because when someone has been blind to your pain for so long, even showing them the wound becomes redundant. Instead, I looked around the house one last time, at the bookshelf filled with family albums where my face only appeared in the margins, at the mantel where Katie's wedding photo stood next to my mother's favorite candle, at the empty hook by the door where my coat used to hang when I still believed being a daughter was enough. And then I turned and walked out. She called out my name once, softly, as if that would somehow stop me, but I didn't stop. I got in my car and drove away, and as I turned the corner, I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful or even sad. What I felt was something closer to freedom, that strange and unfamiliar release that comes not from being forgiven or understood, but from finally accepting that some people will never be who you need them to be. The calls started coming again that evening, then the texts. "We need to talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please don't throw away your family." I didn't reply to any of them. I listened to the voicemails, though. I'm not made of stone. And in the third message, the one she left just after midnight, her voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. "Rachel, if you're listening, I'm sorry. You were never just a practice." But here's the thing. By the time she said it, even if she meant it, even if it was real, it didn't matter. Because some apologies come too late, not just to be heard, but to matter. And when you spend your entire life fighting for a scrap of emotional clarity from someone who only knows how to look past you, there comes a time when even the most sincere regret lands like an echo in an empty room. So I kept driving further each day, not physically, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, creating distance in a way that no map could measure. And with each mile of silence, I felt something grow inside me that I'd never known before. A sense of self that wasn't built around her approval or her attention, but around the radical, unflinching truth that I was never the problem to begin with. There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't descend like a gentle hush, but rather takes root like a parasite, sprawling itself across every part of your life, not in a way that is immediately noticeable, but in the way it lingers in rooms where voices once lived, in the way it hums beneath the floorboards of memories you once thought were solid, and in the days that followed my quiet return to that house, after I handed her that small symbolic box and left without giving her a roadmap back to me, I began to notice how that silence, my silence, had grown teeth, and now it was biting everyone who used to ignore the small, quiet girl who'd stood in the corner waiting to be seen. Katie was the first to break, and I should have expected that, because she was always the one trying to bridge the gaps she never had to cross herself, always trying to smooth over the cracks in our family's brittle surface without ever acknowledging they were there. But now that she had seen the proof, the photos, the letters, the small moments that built a case stronger than any confrontation ever could, she couldn't unsee it. And I think that terrified her more than it hurt her, because realizing that your perfect family was only perfect from your angle is a kind of disillusionment that leaves a permanent mark. She called me late on a Thursday, her voice raw, hushed, like someone who had been crying but was trying to pull herself together just long enough to get through the conversation. "She's not eating, Rachel," she said. "She's not sleeping. She keeps saying you hate her. She thinks you're punishing her, and honestly, I don't know if she's wrong." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much. and I knew she wouldn't be able to carry even half of it. There's a weight to years of quiet hurt, and once it's finally been acknowledged, it becomes too heavy to hand off to someone who never had to bear it in the first place. "She's not dying, Katie," I finally said, my voice even, almost bored, because I couldn't keep injecting urgency into a story that had always treated me like a footnote. "She's just uncomfortable, and that's new for her." Katie didn't like that. She flinched the way people do when the truth slaps too hard and too fast. "That's cruel," she whispered, but it sounded more like a question than a judgment, as though she wasn't sure anymore what cruelty really looked like. "No, I said. "What's cruel is spending your entire childhood begging for love you had to earn, while someone else got it handed to them like a birthright. What's cruel is being told you're too sensitive every time you ask why you were always last. What's cruel is pretending that this," I gestured around me though she couldn't see it, "was ever normal." She started crying then, soft and slow, like a faucet someone couldn't fully turn off. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear, Rachel, I didn't know." And maybe she didn't. Maybe she couldn't. Because when the spotlight has always been warm on your face, you don't notice the shadows where someone else is freezing. Still, I didn't rush to comfort her. That wasn't my job anymore. We ended the call not with resolution, but with silence. That same heavy presence that had become my closest ally. And I realized then that silence wasn't just a lack of sound. It was a boundary, a line I had drawn so cleanly that even my mother, who had spent years ignoring every one I'd tried to set before, now stood behind it trembling, unable to cross. A few days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before answering, and it was Katie again, but this time, her voice wasn't soft. It was shaking, full of panic and guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. "She's in the hospital," she said. "Rachel, Mom, she fainted. Dehydration. They're saying it's stress-related. She keeps asking for you. She says it's your silence that's killing her." I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know what caring looked like anymore when it came to a woman who had never learned how to mother me in the way I needed. I felt something rise in my throat, but it wasn't panic or grief. It was a deep, aching kind of clarity, the kind that makes you realize that some wounds stop bleeding long before they ever really heal. "She'll be fine," I said eventually. My voice low, steady, the same tone I might use to talk about the weather. People don't die from being ignored. They die from pretending too long that they didn't hurt someone. Katie tried again. "She's scared, Rachel. She's really scared." "Don't you want to fix this before it's too late?" Too late. That phrase echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. It had always been too late. Too late to hear "I'm proud of you" when I needed it. Too late to get a hug at graduation. Too late to be picked first, or even second. Too late to matter in the way I should have mattered. "I don't think I'm the one who has to fix this," I said, and then I hung up. I stood at the window after that call, watching the rain streak down the glass in slow, deliberate lines, and I thought about how many times I had stood like that, watching the world go by, waiting for someone to notice I was drowning. No one ever did, so I learned to breathe underwater. And now, standing there, dry and safe and unburdened by the weight of being the practice child, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt clean. Empty, maybe, but in a way that made room for something new. Because the truth is, sometimes closure doesn't come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. Sometimes closure is just the sound of your own voice saying, "I'm done," and meaning it. And what do you do with silence? You let it live. You let it echo. You let it be the answer to a question that never really needed to be asked.